The knock came so faint that Lucas Garrison almost missed it over the howling wind that rattled his cabin windows in the winter darkness of 1878. He set down his cup of coffee and listened, wondering if he had imagined it. But then it came again, more desperate this time, followed by a soft thud against the wooden door. Lucas moved quickly across the small room, his boots heavy on the floorboards as he unlatched the door and pulled it open. The blast of icy air hit him first, carrying with it swirling snow that had been falling for 3 days straight across the Colorado Territory. But it was the sight of the woman collapsed against his doorframe that made his heart leap into his throat. She was shivering so violently that her whole body shook, her lips nearly blue in the lantern light that spilled from his cabin. Her dark hair was matted with snow and ice, her thin coat doing nothing to protect her from the brutal cold that had settled over Piñon and the surrounding mountains. Her eyes, when they lifted to meet his, were a striking hazel that spoke of desperation and fear. "Please," she managed through chattering teeth, her voice barely above a whisper. "I cannot go any further." Lucas did not hesitate. He scooped her up in his arms, shocked by how light she felt, how cold her body was even through her damp clothing. He kicked the door shut behind him and carried her straight to the fireplace, where flames crackled and danced, throwing welcome heat into the room. "I have got you," he said, his voice rough but gentle as he set her down in the wooden chair closest to the fire. "You are safe now." Her eyes fluttered closed and panic shot through him. He had seen frostbite before, had seen what the mountain cold could do to a person. He grabbed every blanket he owned from his bed and the chest in the corner, wrapping them around her trembling form. But it was not enough. Her shivering was becoming weaker, which he knew was a dangerous sign. Without thinking about propriety or consequences, Lucas pulled off his own wool shirt and wrapped it around her shoulders over the blankets. Then he pulled another chair close and began rubbing her hands between his, trying to bring warmth back into her icy fingers. Her skin felt like marble against his palms. "What is your name?" he asked, trying to keep her conscious and alert. "Can you tell me your name?" Her eyes opened slowly, struggling to focus on his face. "Rose," she whispered. "Rose Sullivan." "Rose," he repeated, continuing to work warmth back into her hands. "I am Lucas Garrison. You are in my cabin about 2 miles outside of Piñon. How did you end up out there in this storm?" She tried to speak, but her teeth were chattering too hard. Lucas stood and moved to his stove, where he poured hot water into a tin cup and added a generous helping of whiskey from his bottle. He brought it back to her and held it to her lips. "Drink this slowly," he instructed. "Small sips." Rose obeyed, wincing at the burn of the whiskey but drinking nonetheless. A bit of color began to return to her cheeks, though she was still shaking. Lucas pulled his chair even closer and began rubbing her arms through the blankets, trying to generate more heat. "My wagon," she finally managed to say. "The wheel broke. My horse ran off when something spooked him. I tried to walk, but I could not see anything in the snow. I just kept walking until I saw your light." Lucas felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. She could have easily walked right past his cabin in the storm and died out there in the snow. His cabin was isolated, set back from the main road, chosen specifically for the privacy it offered. If she had missed his light, she would have wandered into the wilderness where she would have frozen to death within the hour. "You are very lucky," he said quietly. "Most people would not have found anything out here." "I prayed," Rose said, her voice getting slightly stronger as the whiskey and heat began to work through her system. "I prayed that God would show me shelter, and then I saw your light through the trees." Lucas was not much of a religious man, but looking at this woman who had nearly died on his doorstep, he could not help but feel that something more than luck had guided her to his door. He continued warming her hands, noticing the way her fingers were long and delicate, though roughened by work. No wedding ring, he observed, though he immediately chastised himself for noticing such a thing when she was fighting off freezing to death. "Where were you heading?" he asked. "In weather like this, most folks stay put." Rose's expression clouded with something that looked like sadness and determination mixed together. "I was trying to reach Denver. I have family there, or at least I hope I still do. I have not seen my brother in 3 years. From where? Kansas. A town called Concordia." She took another sip of the whiskey-laced water, and more color returned to her face. "I left 2 weeks ago. I thought I could make it before the winter set in hard, but I was wrong." Lucas stood and added more wood to the fire, building it up until heat radiated through the small cabin. He went to his cupboard and pulled out a can of beans and some dried beef, setting about making a hot meal. Rose needed food as much as she needed warmth. "You traveled all this way alone?" he asked as he worked at the stove. "That is a dangerous journey for anyone, let alone a woman on her own." He saw her stiffen slightly at his words, and he quickly added, "I mean no offense. I only mean that the roads are full of dangerous men and weather this time of year." "I had no choice," Rose said quietly. "Staying where I was would have been more dangerous than leaving." Lucas heard the weight behind those words, the story she was not telling. He had his own reasons for living out here alone, his own past he did not care to discuss. He understood about running from things. He brought her a plate of beans and beef, along with some bread that he had bought in town 3 days ago. She accepted it gratefully, eating slowly at first and then with more enthusiasm as her body warmed and demanded fuel. Lucas made himself a plate and sat across from her, eating in companionable silence while the storm continued to rage outside. After they had eaten, Rose's eyes began to droop, despite her obvious efforts to stay awake. Lucas recognized exhaustion when he saw it. She had probably been walking for hours before she found his cabin, fighting the cold and the wind and her own terror. "You need to rest," he said gently. "You can take my bed. I will sleep out here by the fire." Rose's eyes flew open, suddenly alert. "I cannot take your bed. You have already done so much." "I insist," Lucas said firmly. "You need proper rest to recover from the cold. Besides, I have spent many nights sleeping by the fire. It is no hardship." He could see her struggling with propriety and exhaustion, but exhaustion won out. She nodded gratefully, and he helped her stand, keeping the blankets wrapped around her as he guided her to his small bedroom. It was a simple space with just a bed, a chest of drawers, and a small table, but it was clean and the bed had plenty of quilts. "Your clothes are wet," he said, averting his eyes. "I will leave some of my things for you to change into. They will be too big, but they will be dry and warm." He pulled out a clean shirt and a pair of long johns from his drawer, setting them on the bed. Then he quickly retreated, closing the door behind him to give her privacy. He busied himself cleaning up the dinner dishes and stoking the fire, trying not to think about the beautiful woman changing clothes in his bedroom. Lucas had been alone in this cabin for 2 years now, ever since he had left Texas, and everything he had known behind. He had chosen solitude, had wanted it, but something about having Rose here made him realize just how lonely he had been. The sound of another person moving around, the knowledge that someone else was breathing in his space, it stirred something in him that he had thought was dead. A few minutes later, the bedroom door opened and Rose emerged wearing his shirt, which fell nearly to her knees, and the long johns rolled up several times at the ankles. Her dark hair hung loose around her shoulders, drying now in the warmth of the cabin. Despite the ridiculous oversized clothes, she was lovely. More than lovely, she was beautiful in a way that made Lucas's breath catch. "Thank you," she said softly, For everything. You saved my life tonight." "Anyone would have done the same," Lucas said, though he knew that was not entirely true. There were plenty of men who would have taken advantage of a woman alone and desperate. He had known such men in his past. "Not everyone," Rose said, and there was a knowing in her eyes that suggested she had encountered some of those other men on her journey. "You are a good man, Lucas Garrison." He did not feel like a good man. Good men did not leave their families behind. Good men did not run from their responsibilities, but he accepted her words with a simple nod, not trusting himself to speak. "Rest now," he said. "The storm should break by morning, and we can figure out what to do about your wagon and your journey to Denver." Rose nodded and returned to the bedroom, closing the door softly behind her. Lucas settled himself by the fire with a couple of blankets and his saddle for a pillow. It was not the most comfortable bed, but he had slept in worse places. He lay there listening to the wind howl and the fire crackle, thinking about the turn his quiet life had just taken. He must have dozed off because he woke to the sound of crying. Soft, muffled sobs coming from the bedroom. Lucas sat up, uncertain what to do. Every instinct told him to go to her, to comfort her, but that would be inappropriate. She was a stranger, a woman alone under his roof. He had already pushed the boundaries of propriety by having her here at all. But the crying continued, and Lucas found himself standing, moving toward the bedroom door. He knocked softly. "Rose, are you all right?" The crying stopped abruptly. A moment of silence, then her voice thick with tears. "I am fine. I am sorry I woke you." "You did not wake me," he lied. "May I come in?" Another pause. "Yes." Lucas opened the door and stepped into the dim room, lit only by the moonlight coming through the small window. Rose was sitting up in bed, tears streaming down her face, her arms wrapped around herself. Without thinking, Lucas sat on the edge of the bed. "What is wrong?" he asked gently. "Are you in pain? Did the cold hurt you worse than I thought?" She shook her head. "No, nothing like that. I just keep thinking about how close I came to dying out there. If I had not found your cabin, if you had not been here, I would be frozen in the snow right now. And no one would have even known. No one would have found me until spring, if ever." Lucas understood that kind of fear, the terror of realizing how fragile life really was. He reached out and took her hand, and she gripped it tightly. "But you did find my cabin," he said. "And you are here, safe and warm. You do not need to think about what might have been." "I have been alone for so long," Rose whispered. "Ever since my parents died, I have been completely alone. I thought I had to be strong, that I could not let anyone see me afraid. But tonight, I was so afraid, so terribly afraid." Something in Lucas's chest cracked open at her words. He knew about being alone, about building walls to keep people out. Without consciously deciding to do it, he put his arm around her shoulders and pulled her close. She came willingly, pressing her face against his chest as she cried. "You do not have to be alone right now," he said softly. "And you do not have to be strong every minute. Sometimes it is all right to let someone else carry the weight for a while." They sat like that for a long time, Rose crying quietly while Lucas held her, offering what comfort he could. Gradually her tears subsided, and she pulled back slightly, looking up at him with those striking hazel eyes. "I am sorry," she said. "I do not usually fall apart like this with strangers. After what you have been through tonight, I think you are entitled to fall apart a little," Lucas said with a small smile. "And maybe we are not complete strangers anymore, not after this." Rose returned his smile, small but genuine. "No, I suppose we are not." Lucas knew he should stand up, should return to his place by the fire and leave her to rest. But something kept him rooted to the spot, unable to break the connection between them. Rose seemed to feel it too, her eyes searching his face as if looking for answers to questions she had not yet asked. "Will you stay?" she finally whispered. "Just for a little while. I do not want to be alone right now." Every rule of propriety screamed at Lucas to refuse, to maintain proper distance. But propriety seemed like a small thing compared to the vulnerability in her eyes, the need for human comfort after coming so close to death. He nodded and shifted so he was leaning against the headboard, staying on top of the quilts while she remained beneath them. Rose settled against his side, her head resting on his shoulder. "Tell me something about yourself," she said softly. "Something real." Lucas thought about what to share, how much of his past to reveal. "I came here 2 years ago from Texas," he finally said. "My family has a ranch there, a big spread with cattle and horses. I was supposed to take it over when my father retired, but I could not do it. Could not be the man they wanted me to be." "Why not?" Rose asked, her voice gentle and non-judgmental. "My father and I did not see eye to eye on a lot of things," Lucas said carefully. "The way he treated the men who worked for us, the way he did business. I tried to change things when he gave me more responsibility, but he overruled me at every turn. We had a big fight about it, said things that could not be taken back, so I left." "You regret it?" Lucas considered the question. "Some days, I miss my mother and my younger sister. But I do not regret standing up for what I believed was right, even if it cost me everything." Rose was quiet for a moment, then she said, "I think that takes more courage than staying would have." Her words touched something deep inside Lucas, a wound he had not realized was still bleeding. He had been called a coward by his father, told he was throwing away his birthright and his family's legacy. Hearing Rose call it courage instead made his throat tight. "What about you?" he asked, deflecting attention from himself. "You said you were alone after your parents died. What happened?" Rose tensed slightly, and Lucas immediately regretted the question. "You do not have to tell me," he added quickly. "I should not have asked." "No, it is all right," Rose said. "It happened 2 years ago. There was a fire. The whole house burned down with them inside. I was visiting a friend in town that night, which is the only reason I survived. My brother had already moved to Denver for work, so it was just me left in Concordia." "I am so sorry," Lucas said, tightening his arm around her. "I stayed with neighbors for a while, but I could not impose on them forever. I found work as a seamstress, managed to save a little money. But then the man who owned the shop where I worked started making advances. He thought because I was alone, because I had no family to protect me, I had no choice but to accept his attention." Lucas felt anger surge through him at the thought of someone taking advantage of Rose's situation. "What did you do?" "I quit," Rose said simply. "Even though I needed the money desperately. I tried to find other work, but he spread rumors about me around town, made it so no one would hire me. I realized I had to leave, had to get to Denver and my brother. He is the only family I have left." "That took courage too," Lucas said. "Leaving everything familiar to start over somewhere new." "Or desperation," Rose said with a bitter laugh. "Sometimes I think they look very similar." "Maybe they do," Lucas agreed. "Maybe courage is just desperation that turns out well in the end." Rose laughed again, but this time it was genuine, without the bitter edge. She relaxed against him, and Lucas felt her breathing begin to even out as sleep claimed her. He knew he should move, should return to the fire, but he found himself unable to leave. Instead, he stayed there, holding her while she slept, watching the moonlight play across her face. Something had shifted in the few hours since Rose had knocked on his door. Lucas felt it in his chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire in the other room. He barely knew this woman, had only met her hours ago, but already he felt connected to her in a way he could not explain. They were both running from pasts that haunted them, both trying to find their way in a world that had turned harsh and unforgiving. As the night wore on, Lucas finally dozed off himself, his head resting against the headboard, his arm still around Rose. When he woke to the pale light of dawn filtering through the window, he found her watching him with those hazel eyes. "Good morning," she said softly, a slight blush coloring her cheeks as she realized their position. "Morning," Lucas replied, sitting up and immediately missing her warmth. "How do you feel?" "Much better," Rose said. "Warm, alive," she smiled. "Thanks to you." Lucas stood, suddenly aware of how improper the situation was in the clear light of day. "I should check on the storm," he said, moving toward the window. The sight that greeted him was both beautiful and daunting. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world transformed by snow. Everything was buried under at least 2 feet of fresh powder, with drifts that reached much higher in places. The sky was a brilliant blue, the kind that only came after a major storm, but the temperature would still be bitterly cold. "The storm has passed," he reported. "But there is a lot of snow out there. It will be difficult to travel for a few days until the roads are cleared." Rose came to stand beside him at the window, and Lucas caught the scent of her hair, something floral that she must have put in it before her journey. "I cannot stay here and impose on you for days," she said, worry clear in her voice. "You are not imposing," Lucas said firmly. "You are welcome to stay as long as you need to. Besides, even if you wanted to leave, your wagon is broken and your horse is gone. You would need to get to town to arrange new transportation anyway, and the road will not be passable until tomorrow at the earliest." Rose bit her lip, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Lucas understood. An unmarried woman staying alone with a man, even under these circumstances, could ruin her reputation. But what choice did they have? She could not leave, and he would not send her away even if she could. "Let us not worry about it right now," he said. "I will make us some breakfast, and then we can figure out the rest." Over the next few days, an easy rhythm developed between them. Lucas would wake early and build up the fire, start coffee brewing on the stove. Rose would emerge from the bedroom wearing his oversized clothes, her hair braided to keep it out of her face. They would make breakfast together, moving around the small cabin in a dance that became more natural each day. Lucas taught Rose how to make his biscuits, laughing when her first batch came out hard as rocks. She showed him how to properly mend his shirts, which he had been doing badly with clumsy stitches that pulled and gaped. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing stories from their pasts, their hopes for the future. On the second day, Lucas made his way through the snow to check his small barn where he kept his horse and a milk cow. Rose insisted on coming with him, bundled up in every piece of warm clothing he could find for her. They fed the animals together, and Lucas showed her how to milk the cow, which she had never done before. "City girl," he teased gently as she fumbled with the process. "Small town girl," she corrected with a laugh. "But yes, I have always bought my milk, never made it myself." By the third day, the snow had settled enough that Lucas thought he could make it into Pinyon on horseback. He needed supplies, and he wanted to see if anyone had reported a missing wagon or a runaway horse. Rose was nervous about him leaving, though she tried to hide it. "I will be back before dark," he promised as he saddled his horse. "You will be fine here. Keep the fire going and the door barred. Do not open it for anyone but me." "Be careful," Rose said, and the concern in her eyes made Lucas's heart skip a beat. The ride into town was cold and difficult, but Lucas made good time. Pinyon was a small mining town tucked into the mountains, with one main street lined with wooden buildings. He stopped first at the general store to buy supplies, then headed to the sheriff's office. Sheriff Tom Reynolds looked up from his desk when Lucas entered, his weathered face breaking into a smile. "Lucas Garrison, did not expect to see you in town after that storm." Everything all right at your place? Fine, Lucas said. But I found something the night of the storm, or rather, someone found me. A woman knocked on my door half frozen. She said her wagon broke and her horse ran off. I was wondering if anyone had reported anything. The sheriff shook his head. No reports of missing wagons or horses. Was she all right? The woman. She is recovering at my cabin, Lucas said, and he saw the sheriff's eyebrows raise slightly. She could not travel with all the snow. Of course, the sheriff said neutrally. What is her name? I can check if there are any wanted posters or anything. Rose Sullivan. She was heading to Denver from Kansas. The sheriff rifled through some papers on his desk, but came up empty. Nothing on anyone by that name. If her horse ran off, it probably froze in the storm or got taken by wolves. As for the wagon, it is likely buried in snow somewhere. Not much we can do about finding it until spring. Lucas had expected as much. I figured. Just thought I should check. You planning to bring her into town? The sheriff asked casually, but Lucas heard the real question underneath. Was he planning to do the proper thing and find Rose somewhere else to stay, with a respectable family perhaps, to avoid scandal? When the roads are clearer, Lucas said vaguely. She needs to arrange transportation to Denver anyway. The sheriff nodded slowly. Well, you let me know if you need anything, and give Miss Sullivan my regards. Lucas left the sheriff's office feeling unsettled. He knew what people would think, what they would say. An unmarried woman staying alone with a bachelor in his isolated cabin. But when he thought about Rose, about sending her to stay with strangers in town, something in him rebelled. She was safe with him, comfortable. And if he was being honest with himself, he was not ready to let her go. He made one more stop at the boarding house where the owner, Mrs. Martha Green, sometimes cooked meals for extra money. He ordered a proper roasted chicken and vegetables, paying extra for her to make a pie as well. If Rose had to be stuck in his cabin, at least he could give her a decent meal. The ride back seemed longer than the ride in, though Lucas knew that was just his eagerness to return. When he finally saw his cabin through the trees, smoke rising from the chimney in the late afternoon light, something in his chest eased. He was home. Rose opened the door before he could knock, relief clear on her face. I was starting to worry. I told you I would be back before dark, Lucas said, carrying in his packages. I brought supplies and dinner from town. Her eyes lit up when she saw the chicken and pie. Oh, that smells wonderful. I am afraid my cooking skills do not extend much beyond beans and bread. They had a feast that night, eating the roasted chicken and vegetables by firelight, savoring every bite. Lucas had also bought a bottle of wine in town, something he almost never indulged in, but it seemed appropriate for the occasion. They sat by the fire after dinner, sipping wine and talking late into the night. I spoke to the sheriff, Lucas said. No reports of your wagon or horse. He said the horse probably did not survive the storm. Rose nodded sadly. I thought as much. That poor animal. It was not his fault I pushed too hard, tried to travel when I should have stopped. What will you do? Lucas asked, though part of him dreaded the answer. About getting to Denver. Rose was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. I have been thinking about that, she said slowly. I could take a stage from Pinyon, but that would cost most of the money I have left, and I do not even know if my brother is still in Denver. The last letter I got from him was over a year ago. He could have moved on by then. You could write to him, Lucas suggested. Send a letter to his last known address and wait for a reply before you make the journey. I could, Rose agreed, but where would I stay while I wait? I cannot stay here indefinitely, imposing on your hospitality. Why not? The words were out before Lucas could stop them. I mean, you are welcome to stay as long as you need to. There is plenty of room and I could use the company. Rose turned to look at him, her hazel eyes searching his face. People would talk, Lucas. A woman living alone with a man, unmarried, it would ruin both our reputations. I do not care much about reputation, Lucas said. If I did, I would still be in Texas running my father's ranch the way he wanted. But I care about yours, Rose said softly. You have been nothing but kind to me. I will not repay that kindness by causing you problems. Lucas wanted to argue, to tell her that having her here was not a problem at all. That in fact, the thought of her leaving made his chest ache in a way he did not fully understand. But he could see the determination in her eyes, the same strength that had carried her all the way from Kansas in a broken wagon. At least stay until you hear back from your brother, he said. Write the letter tomorrow and I will take it to town to post. Letters take time, especially in winter. No one will think anything of you staying here while you wait for a reply. Rose considered this, then nodded slowly. All right, that seems reasonable. Thank you, Lucas, for everything. That night, as Lucas lay by the fire listening to Rose move around in his bedroom preparing for sleep, he acknowledged to himself what he had been denying for days. He was falling for her. This woman who had stumbled into his life out of a snowstorm, who made him laugh and made him think and made him feel things he had thought were dead inside him. He was falling hard and fast, and he had no idea what to do about it. The next morning, Rose wrote a letter to her brother while Lucas did chores around the cabin. She was oddly quiet, and when he asked if everything was all right, she just nodded and said she was fine, but Lucas could tell something was bothering her. What is it? He finally asked, sitting down across from her at the small table, and do not say nothing. I can see something is on your mind. Rose set down her pen and looked at him. I am afraid, she admitted. Afraid that my brother will not respond, or worse, that he will respond and tell me not to come. What will I do then? Where will I go? Lucas reached across the table and took her hand. Then you will figure something else out. You are strong, Rose. You made it all the way from Kansas on your own. You survived a blizzard. You will survive whatever comes next. I do not feel strong, Rose said, her voice breaking slightly. I feel scared and alone and lost. You are not alone, Lucas said firmly, squeezing her hand. Not anymore. Their eyes met across the table, and something unspoken passed between them. Lucas saw his own feelings reflected in Rose's face, the same confusion and hope and fear. She felt it too, this connection that had formed between them in just a few short days. Rose was the first to look away, gently pulling her hand back. I should finish this letter. Lucas let it drop, but the moment stayed with him as he went about his day. That evening, he saddled his horse to ride into town with the letter. It had started snowing again, nothing like the blizzard that had brought Rose to his door, but enough to make the journey unpleasant. You should wait until morning, Rose said, worried. It is already getting dark. The mail coach leaves at dawn, Lucas explained. If I wait until morning, your letter will miss it and have to wait another 3 days. I will be fine. I know this road well. Rose reluctantly accepted this, and Lucas set off into the snowy twilight. The trip was cold and uncomfortable, but he made it to town without incident. He posted Rose's letter and stopped at the saloon for a quick whiskey to warm up before the ride home. Evening, Lucas, the bartender greeted him. Heard you have a lady staying with you. Lucas should have known word would spread fast in a small town like Pinyon. She was caught in the storm. I am helping her until she can arrange travel to Denver. That is mighty charitable of you, a voice said from down the bar. Lucas looked over to see Jack Thornton, a local ranch hand with a reputation for causing trouble. Pretty girl like that, all alone with a man, mighty charitable indeed. The implication in his tone made Lucas's jaw clench. Watch your mouth, Thornton. Just saying what everyone is thinking, Jack said with an ugly smile. Though I suppose if she is that kind of woman, you might be willing to share once you are done with her. Lucas moved faster than he had time to think. He grabbed Jack by the shirt and slammed him against the bar, his face inches from the other man's. You will not speak about her that way, do you understand me? She is a respectable woman who was in trouble and I helped her. That is all. Jack's eyes widened, and he nodded quickly. Lucas released him and stepped back, his heart pounding. He was not usually a violent man, but hearing someone talk about Rose like that had made him see red. I think you should go home, Lucas, the bartender said quietly, before this gets any worse. Lucas threw some coins on the bar and left, his hands still shaking with anger. The ride home was a blur, his mind churning with dark thoughts. This was exactly what Rose had been worried about, people talking, assuming the worst. And if he was being honest, some of those thoughts were not entirely unfounded. He had held her while she cried, slept beside her that first night, felt things for her that were far from innocent. But he had never taken advantage of her, never even kissed her, though he had wanted to more times than he could count. Did not that mean anything? When he got back to the cabin, Rose took one look at his face and knew something was wrong. What happened? Lucas did not want to tell her, did not want to repeat the ugly words that had been said. But she deserved to know what she was facing if she stayed here much longer. Just talk in town, he said carefully. People speculating about you being here. Rose's face fell. I knew it. I told you this would happen. Your reputation will be ruined because of me. I do not care about my reputation, Lucas said fiercely. But you were right that people talk. It might be difficult for you when you leave here if word spreads. Then I should leave sooner rather than later, Rose said, but her voice was sad. I will find work in Pinyon until I hear from my brother. There must be someone in town who needs a seamstress or a cook or something. Is that what you want? Lucas asked. To leave? Rose looked up at him, and he saw tears glistening in her eyes. No, she whispered, but I do not see what other choice I have. I cannot stay here and let people think terrible things about you. Lucas crossed the room in 3 long strides and took her face in his hands, forcing her to look at him. What if I do not care what people think? What if the only thing that matters to me is that you are here, safe and happy? Lucas, she breathed, and he could hear everything she was not saying in that single word. I know it has only been a few days, he continued, his thumbs brushing away the tears that had started to fall. I know this is fast and probably crazy, but I have never felt like this before, Rose. When I think about you leaving, it feels like someone is pulling my heart out of my chest. I feel it too, Rose admitted, her hands coming up to grip his wrists. I thought I was alone in this, that maybe I was just grateful to you for saving me and I was confusing that with something else. But it is not just gratitude. When I am with you, I feel like I have come home, like I have been searching for something my whole life and finally found it. Lucas leaned his forehead against hers, his eyes closing as he breathed her in. Then stay, not just until you hear from your brother. Stay here with me. How? Rose asked. How can I stay without ruining both of us? Lucas pulled back to look at her, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might break through his ribs. Marry me. Rose's eyes went wide with shock. What? Marry me, Lucas repeated, the words coming faster now. I know it is sudden. I know we barely know each other. But I also know that I do not want to wake up one day and find you gone. I want you here in my home, in my life. I want to fall asleep next to you every night and wake up to your face every morning. I want to build a life with you, Rose Sullivan. Tears were streaming down Rose's face now, and Lucas felt panic rising. He had gone too far, moved too fast. She was going to say no, and he would have to watch her leave, and he did not know how he would survive it. But then Rose smiled through her tears and said, "Yes, yes," Lucas repeated, hardly daring to believe it. "Yes," Rose said more firmly. "I will marry you, Lucas Garrison." Joy exploded in Lucas's chest, and he pulled Rose into his arms, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around. She laughed, a sound of pure happiness that filled the cabin. When he set her down, he cupped her face in his hands again, and finally, he kissed her. It was gentle at first, tentative, but quickly deepened as weeks of tension and longing poured out of both of them. Rose's arms wrapped around his neck, her fingers threading through his hair, and Lucas pulled her closer, never wanting to let her go. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Lucas rested his forehead against hers again. "I love you," he said. "I know I should not say it so soon, but I do. I love you, Rose." "I love you too," Rose whispered back. "I think I started falling for you the moment you pulled me out of the snow and wrapped me in every blanket you owned." Lucas laughed and kissed her again, softer this time but no less heartfelt. "We should go to town tomorrow and talk to the preacher." "Unless you want to wait, have a proper wedding with your brother there." Rose shook her head. "I do not need anything fancy or proper, I just need you. Tomorrow sounds perfect." They spent the rest of the evening making plans, talking about their future with the excitement of children planning an adventure. Lucas told Rose about his work doing odd jobs for the local ranchers, his small herd of cattle that he was building up. Rose told him about her dreams of opening a seamstress shop, creating beautiful dresses for the women in the area. "We will make it work," Lucas said, holding her close as they sat by the fire. "Together, we can do anything." That night, Rose slept in the bedroom while Lucas kept to his place by the fire, both of them maintaining propriety for one more night. But Lucas barely slept, his mind too full of plans and possibilities and the sheer wonder of what had happened. In the space of less than a week, his entire life had changed. The loneliness that had been his constant companion for 2 years had been chased away by a woman who had knocked on his door, shivering in the cold. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the sun glinting off the snow in a way that made everything look magical. Lucas and Rose bundled up and rode into town together, Rose sitting behind him on his horse, her arms wrapped around his waist. Every point where their bodies touched felt electric, and Lucas had never been more grateful for the cold that gave them an excuse to hold each other close. Pinyon was busier than usual, people emerging after days of being snowbound. Lucas ignored the curious looks they attracted, focusing instead on getting Rose safely to the small church at the end of the main street. Reverend Samuel White was surprised to see them but welcomed them warmly. He was a kind man in his 50s with graying hair and laugh lines around his eyes. When Lucas explained that they wanted to be married, the Reverend raised his eyebrows. "This is rather sudden, is not it?" he asked. "I heard Miss Sullivan only arrived in town recently." "We know our minds," Lucas said firmly, his hand finding Rose's and holding tight. "And our hearts. We want to be married as soon as possible." Reverend White studied them both for a long moment, then smiled. "Very well. Love does not always follow the schedule we expect, but I will need witnesses. And I would feel better if you waited at least a day, spent some time apart to make certain this is what you both want." Lucas wanted to argue, but Rose squeezed his hand. "That is fair," she said. "I can stay at the boarding house for the night. Mrs. Green has rooms, does not she?" "She does," the Reverend confirmed. "And I will speak with her about witnessing the ceremony tomorrow along with my wife. Would late morning suit you both?" They agreed, and Lucas walked Rose to the boarding house with reluctance. Mrs. Green was delighted to have a guest and immediately took Rose under her wing, offering her a hot bath and a proper dress to wear for the wedding. Lucas left Rose there, promising to return the next morning, and spent the rest of the day getting ready for his new life. He cleaned the cabin from top to bottom, scrubbing every surface until it shone. He rode to the nearest ranch and traded some work for a chicken and fresh vegetables. He even picked up a small silver ring from the general store, simple but pretty, that would serve as Rose's wedding band. That night, lying alone by the fire, Lucas could hardly believe this was real. Tomorrow he would be married. Tomorrow Rose would be his wife and he would be her husband. They would build a life together in this small cabin in the Colorado mountains. It was not the life he had been born to, not the future his father had planned for him, but it was the life he chose. And that made all the difference. Morning came slowly, and Lucas was dressed and ready long before it was time to leave for town. He wore his best clothes, a dark suit he had not worn since leaving Texas, and made sure his horse was groomed and ready. The ride into town felt endless, but finally he was dismounting in front of the church, his heart pounding with anticipation. Rose was already there, waiting inside with Mrs. Green and the Reverend's wife, Mrs. White. Lucas's breath caught when he saw her. Mrs. Green had found her a dress in a soft blue that brought out the color in her eyes. Her dark hair was pinned up, with small white flowers tucked into the arrangement. She was beautiful, radiant, and she was about to become his wife. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. They stood before Reverend White and repeated their vows, promising to love and honor each other all the days of their lives. When Lucas slipped the silver ring onto Rose's finger, his hand was shaking. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife and told Lucas he could kiss his bride, he did so tenderly, aware of their audience but unable to help the emotion that poured through him. "I love you, Mrs. Garrison," he whispered against her lips. "I love you too, Mr. Garrison," she whispered back, her eyes shining with happy tears. They signed the marriage certificate. Mrs. Green and Mrs. White witnessed it, and just like that it was done. Lucas Garrison, who had been alone for so long, was married. He had a wife, a partner, someone to share his life with. Mrs. Green insisted on hosting a small wedding breakfast at the boarding house, and several townspeople stopped by to offer congratulations. Lucas noticed that some of the looks were surprised, and he overheard a few whispered comments about the speed of the courtship, but he did not care. Let them talk. He and Rose knew the truth of their love, and that was all that mattered. Finally, late in the morning, they were able to leave town and head back to the cabin. Their cabin now, Lucas thought with satisfaction. Rose's home as much as his. She rode behind him again, but this time when she wrapped her arms around his waist, she was his wife. The thought still made him grin like a fool. Back at the cabin, Lucas carried Rose over the threshold, making her laugh. "We are already married, you know. You do not have to observe all the traditions." "I want to," Lucas said, setting her down gently. "I want to do this right, give you all the things a new bride should have." "All I need is you," Rose said, reaching up to cup his face. "Everything else is just details." They spent the afternoon settling Rose's few possessions into the cabin, making space for her things among his. It did not take long since she had lost most of her belongings when her wagon broke down, but Lucas silently vowed to replace everything she had lost and more. He would buy her new dresses, help her set up her seamstress shop, give her every dream she had ever had. That evening, as they sat down to dinner together as husband and wife, Lucas felt a contentment he had never known before. This was what had been missing from his life. Not just a woman, but this particular woman, with her strength and vulnerability, her determination and kindness. Rose had knocked on his door shivering and desperate, and he had wrapped her in warmth. But she had done the same for him, warming a heart he had thought was frozen, bringing light to a life that had been dark and lonely. As the sun set and shadows lengthened across the cabin floor, Lucas took Rose's hand and led her to the bedroom. Their bedroom now. There were no more walls between them, no more propriety to maintain. She was his wife, and he was her husband, and they had the rest of their lives to learn each other, to build something beautiful together. Lucas pulled Rose close, kissing her softly. "Are you happy?" he asked. "More than I ever dreamed possible," Rose replied, her arms wrapping around him. "You saved my life, Lucas, in more ways than one." "You saved mine too," Lucas said. "I was just surviving before you came. Now I am living." They made love slowly, tenderly, learning each other's bodies with reverence and care. Afterwards, they lay tangled together in the bed, Rose's head on Lucas's chest, his fingers running through her dark hair. "Tell me about Texas," Rose said sleepily. "Tell me about your family." Lucas was quiet for a moment, then began to speak. He told her about the ranch where he had grown up, sprawling and beautiful under the Texas sky. He told her about his mother, who had taught him to read and instilled in him a love of books. He told her about his sister Clara, 10 years younger, who had cried when he left but understood why he had to go. "You think you will ever go back?" Rose asked. "Even just to visit?" "Maybe someday," Lucas said. "When enough time has passed, when the anger has cooled." "I would like you to meet my mother and sister. I think they would love you." "I hope so," Rose said. "I hope I can be a good daughter to your mother, a good sister to Clara." Lucas kissed the top of her head. "You will be. You are good at everything you do." They drifted off to sleep wrapped in each other's arms, warm and safe and deeply in love. Outside, snow began to fall again, but inside the cabin, spring had come early. The weeks that followed were blissful. Lucas and Rose fell into a comfortable rhythm, working together to run the small homestead. Rose took over the cooking and was delighted to discover she was actually quite good at it when she had proper ingredients to work with. Lucas taught her to care for the animals, laughing when she named the cow Daisy, and insisted on talking to her every morning. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, Lucas reading aloud from one of his books while Rose sewed, her hands quick and skilled as she created beautiful things from scraps of fabric. Sometimes they would just talk, sharing stories from their lives, learning more about each other with every passing day. One evening, about a month after their wedding, Lucas came in from chopping wood to find Rose standing at the window, a letter in her hand and tears streaming down her face. His heart dropped. "What is wrong? What happened?" Rose turned to him, and he saw her tears were not sad but happy. "It is from my brother," he wrote back. Lucas crossed to her quickly, reading over her shoulder. The letter was warm and welcoming, saying how happy her brother James was to hear from her, how worried he had been when he had not heard from her for so long. He invited her to come to Denver, said he had a good job and a small house with room for her. "That is wonderful," Lucas said, though his heart sank. Rose had never talked about leaving, but he had always known Denver had been her original destination. What if she wanted to go? But Rose shook her head, wiping away her tears. "It is wonderful to know he is well, to know I have not lost him. But I am not going to Denver, Lucas. My home is here now with you." Relief flooded through Lucas so powerfully it made him weak. "You are sure? I do not want you to regret not going to him." "I am absolutely sure," Rose said firmly, "but I would like to write back and tell him about you, about us. Maybe he could visit sometime, or we could go to Denver to see him." "Of course," Lucas agreed. "I would love to meet your brother, and it is not so far. We could make the journey in summer when the weather is good." Rose threw her arms around Lucas's neck, kissing him soundly. "Have I told you today how much I love you?" "Not for at least an hour," Lucas said with a grin. "I was starting to worry." She laughed and kissed him again. I love you, Lucas Garrison, more than I ever thought it was possible to love someone. I love you too, Rose Garrison, he said, savoring her name. More than words can say. As winter slowly gave way to spring, Lucas and Rose began making plans for their future. With the thaw came the ability to travel more easily, and Lucas found more work with the local ranchers, building up their savings. Rose started taking in sewing work from the women in Piñon, her skill quickly becoming known throughout the area. One warm afternoon in April, Lucas came home to find Rose with a peculiar expression on her face, somewhere between excited and nervous. He set down the tools he had been carrying and crossed to her. "What is it? Is something wrong?" "No, nothing is wrong," Rose said quickly. "At least, I do not think so. I think something is very right, actually." Lucas waited, confused, until Rose took his hand and placed it on her stomach. "We are going to have a baby, Lucas." For a moment, Lucas could not process what she had said. Then understanding crashed over him, and joy, unlike anything he had ever felt, exploded in his chest. "A baby, we are having a baby," Rose nodded, tears in her eyes. "I think so. I am almost certain. All the signs are there." Lucas picked her up and spun her around, making her laugh and protest. "You should not be spinning me around, I might get sick." Sorry, Lucas said, setting her down gently as if she were made of glass. "I am just so happy. We are going to be parents, Rose. You are going to be a mother." "And you are going to be a father," Rose said, her hands framing his face. "Are you happy, truly?" "I have never been happier in my entire life," Lucas said honestly. "Except maybe the day you agreed to marry me, and the day we actually got married, and every day since then." Rose laughed. "I think you just really like being happy." "I like being happy with you," Lucas corrected, pulling her close but carefully, suddenly aware of the precious life growing inside her. The next months were busy as they prepared for the baby's arrival. Lucas built a cradle from pine wood, sanding it until it was smooth as silk. Rose sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her eyes soft with wonder at how small everything was. They argued good-naturedly about names, each suggesting possibilities and vetoing others. What about Lucas for a boy? Rose suggested one evening. "After his father." "Absolutely not," Lucas said firmly. "Can you imagine how confusing that would be? 2 Lucas Garrisons in one small cabin." "Then what about your grandfather's name? You said you loved him." "Henry," Lucas said thoughtfully. "Henry Garrison." "I like that." "And if it is a girl?" Rose asked. Lucas considered. "What about Lily? I have always loved that name." "Lily Garrison," Rose repeated. "That is beautiful. Yes, I like that very much." As Rose's belly grew round with their child, Lucas found himself marveling at the miracle of it. This woman who had stumbled into his life out of a blizzard was carrying his child. They were creating a family together, building something that would last long after they were gone. In late October, as the leaves were turning gold and the air was growing crisp, Rose went into labor. Lucas rode to town in a panic to fetch the midwife, Mrs. Patterson, an experienced woman who had delivered half the babies in Piñon. She came quickly, her calm presence settling Lucas's frayed nerves. "This is what women have been doing since the beginning of time," she told him as Rose labored through the night. "Your wife is strong. She will be fine, and so will your baby." Lucas sat with Rose, holding her hand, wiping her forehead with a cool cloth. She was incredible, so strong even in her pain. As dawn was breaking over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, their son was born. "A boy," Mrs. Patterson announced, placing the squalling infant in Rose's arms. "A healthy, strong boy." Lucas looked down at his son, this tiny perfect person with a full head of dark hair and blue eyes that would probably change color later. He felt his throat tighten with emotion as Rose looked up at him with exhausted, joyful eyes. "Henry," she said softly. "Our Henry." Lucas kissed his wife's forehead, then gently touched his son's tiny hand. Henry's fingers immediately wrapped around Lucas's thumb, and something in Lucas's chest cracked open completely. This was his son, his and Rose's, a product of their love, a living symbol of the life they had built together. "Hello, Henry," Lucas whispered. "Welcome to the world, son." The first months with a new baby were exhausting but wonderful. Henry was a good baby, only crying when he was hungry or needed changing. Lucas would walk the floor with him in the middle of the night, singing softly while Rose caught a few precious hours of sleep. Rose would nurse him while Lucas cooked dinner, both of them marveling at this tiny person they had created. Letters came from Rose's brother James, congratulating them on the birth and promising to visit in the spring. Lucas's mother had been harder to track down, but when he finally sent word of his marriage and son's birth, she wrote back immediately. Her letter was full of love and forgiveness, saying how much she missed him, how proud she was of the life he had built. She enclosed a photograph of herself and Clara, both of them smiling for the camera. "They look kind," Rose said, studying the photograph. "I hope I get to meet them someday." "You will," Lucas promised. "When Henry is a bit older, we will make the trip to Texas. I want them to know my son, and I want to make things right with my mother." As winter set in again, almost exactly a year after Rose had knocked on Lucas's door, they settled into their cabin with their son. On the anniversary of that fateful night, Lucas and Rose lay in bed with Henry sleeping in his cradle beside them. "Do you remember what you were thinking when you knocked on my door that night?" Lucas asked, playing with Rose's hair. "I was thinking I was going to die," Rose said honestly. "I was so cold, so tired. I could barely keep walking. When I saw the light from your cabin, I thought maybe I was imagining it, that I was already dying and seeing things. But I made myself keep going, forced myself to reach that door and knock." "I almost did not hear you," Lucas admitted. "The wind was so loud. If you had knocked even a little softer, if I had been in the other room, I might have missed it." Rose shivered and pressed closer to him. "I do not like to think about what would have happened if you had not heard me." "But I did hear you," Lucas said firmly. "And you knocked, and I opened the door, and you came into my life. The best thing that ever happened to me." "The best thing that ever happened to me too," Rose said. "I thought I was just looking for shelter from the storm. I did not know I was coming home." Lucas kissed her softly. "You gave me everything, Rose. A home, a family, a future. You took a lonely cowboy living in the middle of nowhere and made him the happiest man alive." "You saved my life," Rose whispered. "You wrapped me in warmth that first night, and you have been keeping me warm ever since." "I will keep you warm for the rest of our lives," Lucas promised. "You and Henry and any other children we might have. This is my vow to you, Rose. I will always be here, always protect you, always love you." "And I will always love you," Rose said. "Always." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, their son sleeping peacefully beside them, snow beginning to fall gently outside. The cabin was warm, filled with love and laughter and the promise of all the days to come. Years passed in that cabin in the Colorado mountains. Lucas continued to work the land and take jobs with local ranchers, building up their homestead bit by bit. Rose's seamstress business flourished, and she became known throughout the territory for her beautiful work. They added a room onto the cabin, then another, as their family grew. 3 years after Henry was born, they welcomed a daughter they named Lily, just as they had planned. She had Rose's hazel eyes and Lucas's smile, and she wrapped her father around her little finger from the moment she arrived. 2 years after that came another son, James, named for Rose's brother who had become a regular visitor and beloved uncle. Rose's brother James eventually moved to Pinyon, drawn by his sister's happiness, and the beauty of the mountains. He found work as a carpenter and built his own house just down the road from Lucas and Rose. He married a school teacher named Sarah, and their children grew up playing with Henry, Lily, and baby James. When Henry was 5, Lucas finally made the journey back to Texas with his whole family. His mother wept when she saw him, and any remaining hurt or anger melted away as she held her grandchildren for the first time. Lucas's father had passed away the year before, and Clara had married a kind man who worked the ranch with respect and fairness, the way Lucas had always wanted to do. "Your father was proud of you," Lucas's mother told him one evening as they sat on the porch watching the children play. "He never said it, but I knew. He respected that you stood up for what you believed in, even though it cost you everything." "It did not cost me everything," Lucas said, watching Rose laugh as Lily tried to catch fireflies. "It led me to everything. To Rose, to my children, to the life I was meant to live." "She is wonderful," his mother said warmly. "I am so glad you found her, or she found you, I suppose." "We found each other," Lucas said with a smile. They stayed in Texas for a month before returning to Colorado, but Lucas and Rose promised to visit more often. Clara and her husband even talked about coming to Colorado for a visit, wanting to see the mountains and the life Lucas had built. Back in their cabin, life continued to unfold in beautiful, ordinary ways. Lucas taught Henry and James to ride, to care for the animals, to work the land with respect. Rose taught Lily to sew and cook, but also made sure her daughter knew how to read and write and do figures. All 3 children attended the school in Pinyon, riding there together each day. On cold winter nights, the family would gather around the fire, Lucas reading aloud from books while Rose sewed and the children played. Sometimes Lucas would tell them the story of how he and Rose met, how she had knocked on his door during the worst blizzard he had ever seen. "Mama was very brave," Lily would always say. "And Papa saved her," Henry would add. "We saved each other," Rose would correct gently, her eyes meeting Lucas's across the room. "That is what people who love each other do." As the years went on, Lucas and Rose's hair began to silver, their children grew into capable adults. Henry took over much of the work on the homestead, showing his father's skill with animals and the land. Lily became a teacher at the Pinyon School, inspiring young minds the way Rose had always inspired those around her. James followed his uncle into carpentry, building beautiful furniture that people came from miles around to buy. One by one, the children married and started families of their own. Henry married a rancher's daughter named Emma, and they built a house on land adjacent to Lucas and Rose's property. Lily married a doctor who had come to Pinyon from back east, and they settled in town. James married his childhood sweetheart, a girl named Alice who had always lived down the road. Lucas and Rose became grandparents, then great-grandparents. Their cabin, which had once seemed so small and isolated, became the heart of a sprawling family that stretched across the territory. Sunday dinners at Lucas and Rose's place became tradition, with children and grandchildren gathering to share food and stories and laughter. On the 50th anniversary of the night Rose had knocked on Lucas's door, the family threw a big celebration. The cabin had been expanded over the years, but the original room where Lucas had first wrapped Rose in blankets and warmed her by the fire was still there, preserved as the heart of their home. "Tell us the story again," one of the great-grandchildren begged. "Tell us how great-grandma Rose knocked on the door." Lucas, now 70 years old but still strong and clear-eyed, pulled Rose close to his side and began the familiar tale. Rose rested her head on his shoulder, listening to her husband describe that night so long ago. Even after 50 years, the memory was vivid, as fresh as if it had happened yesterday. I opened the door, Lucas said, and there she was, the most beautiful woman I had ever seen, covered in snow and shivering so hard I thought she might break. And I knew in that moment, though I did not realize it yet, that my whole life had been leading to that knock on the door. That everything I had been through, every choice I had made, had brought me to that exact place at that exact time so I could open the door and let in the woman who would become my whole world. Rose reached up and touched Lucas's weathered cheek. And he wrapped me in blankets and warmth and love, and he never stopped. 50 years later, and I am still warmed by him every single day. The family applauded, some wiping away tears. The children ran off to play, and the adults settled into conversations. Lucas and Rose slipped away from the party, walking hand in hand to the place where Rose's wagon had broken down all those years ago. Someone had built a bench there, a quiet spot to sit and look out over the valley. They sat together as the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. The mountains stood eternal in the distance, unchanged by the passing of years. But everything else had changed. Where there had been loneliness, now there was love. Where there had been isolation, now there was family. Where there had been fear and uncertainty, now there was peace and joy. "Do you ever regret it?" Lucas asked, as he sometimes still did after all these years. "Knocking on that door, marrying a cowboy you barely knew." Rose turned to look at him, her hazel eyes still as striking as they had been that first night, though now surrounded by laugh lines and crow's feet. "Not for a single second. You gave me everything, Lucas. A home, a family, a love I never dreamed was possible. You wrapped me in warmth that lasted a lifetime long, just like you promised." "I would do it all again," Lucas said, kissing her softly. "Every moment, every year, I would choose you every single time." "And I would choose you," Rose said. "Always you." They sat together as the sun dipped below the mountains, watching the sky turn from orange to purple to deep blue. Inside the cabin, their family laughed and celebrated, carrying on the legacy of love that had started with a desperate knock on a door during a blizzard 50 years ago. Lucas and Rose had several more good years together. They watched their great-grandchildren grow, celebrated more weddings and births. They took walks every evening when weather permitted, always ending up at their bench overlooking the valley. They still held hands, still kissed like newlyweds, still looked at each other with the same love and wonder they had felt from the beginning. When Rose fell ill in the winter of her 72nd year, Lucas never left her side. He held her hand through every difficult moment, just as he had that first night when she had been fighting off the cold. Their children and grandchildren came to say goodbye, the cabin once again filled with family. On a quiet morning in February, with snow falling gently outside and Lucas holding her hand, Rose passed peacefully in her sleep. Lucas's heart shattered, but even through his grief, he was grateful. Grateful for every moment they had shared, every laugh and tear an ordinary day. She had knocked on his door shivering and afraid, and he had wrapped her in warmth. She had given him a lifetime of love in return. Lucas lived for 3 more years after Rose died, cared for by his children and surrounded by family. But everyone could see that part of him had gone with her. He would often sit on their bench at sunset, talking to Rose as if she were still beside him. He never remarried, never even considered it. He had found his soulmate, his other half, and no one could ever replace her. When Lucas finally passed in his sleep at the age of 75, his family buried him next to Rose on a hill overlooking the valley. They placed a simple headstone that read, "Lucas Garrison, beloved husband, father, and grandfather." He opened the door and found his home. The cabin that Lucas built and expanded, where he and Rose raised their family and created a legacy of love, remained in the family for generations. It became a place of pilgrimage for their descendants, a reminder of where it all started. The story of Rose knocking on Lucas's door during that blizzard became family legend, passed down through the years, a testament to the power of love and the importance of opening your door when someone needs shelter from the storm. The bench where Lucas and Rose spent so many evenings became a favorite spot for proposals. Several of their grandchildren and great-grandchildren got engaged there, sitting where Lucas and Rose had once sat, looking out at the same mountains, feeling the same love that had sustained their ancestors through 50 years of marriage. Henry, their firstborn son, lived to be 87 years old. In his final years, he would sit on the porch of the cabin and tell his great-great-grandchildren about growing up there, about watching his parents' deep love for each other every day of his childhood. They were magic together, he would say. The way your great-great-grandfather looked at your great-great-grandmother even after 50 years, it was like she hung the moon and stars, and she looked at him the same way. That is what love is supposed to be. That is what you should all look for. The values that Lucas and Rose instilled in their children spread through the family like ripples on water. Kindness to strangers, the importance of opening your door to those in need, standing up for what is right even when it costs you, choosing love over fear. These principles became the foundation of a family that grew and flourished across the West. Rose's seamstress shop in Pinyon eventually became a dress store run by her great-granddaughter, carrying on the tradition of beautiful craftsmanship. Lucas's homestead grew into a successful ranch that provided employment for dozens of families over the generations. The family became pillars of the community, known for their generosity and integrity. Every year on the anniversary of that fateful blizzard, the family would gather at the cabin for a celebration they called homecoming. They would share a meal, tell stories, and always, someone would recount the tale of how Rose knocked on Lucas's door and changed not just 2 lives, but hundreds of lives that came after. The original blankets that Lucas had wrapped around Rose that first night were carefully preserved and passed down. They became a symbol of warmth and shelter, both physical and emotional. When new babies were born into the family, they were wrapped in those blankets, connecting them to their ancestors and the love story that had started everything. The love story of Lucas and Rose became more than just a tale of 2 people who found each other. It became a lesson about courage, about taking chances, about being willing to knock on doors when you need help, and being willing to open them when someone else needs shelter. It showed that sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead us exactly where we need to be if we are brave enough to keep walking through the storm. Their descendants spread across Colorado and beyond, but they all carried with them the legacy of that snowy night in 1878. They carried the knowledge that love can bloom in the most unexpected circumstances, that a moment of kindness can change not just one life but generations of lives. They carried the understanding that home is not just a place but a person, and when you find that person, you hold on tight and never let go. The mountains around Pinyon saw many changes over the decades and centuries. The mining boom eventually faded. The town evolved and modernized. But the Garrison family cabin remained, a constant through changing times, a touchstone connecting past and future. It stood as a monument to what can be built when 2 people choose love, when they commit to warming each other through all of life's storms. And somewhere in whatever comes after this life, Lucas and Rose were together again, just as they had been meant to be from that first fateful night. He had opened the door. She had stumbled in shivering and desperate. And together, they had created a warmth that lasted not just a lifetime, but for lifetimes to come, warming generation after generation with the power of their love. The story that began with a knock on a door in a blizzard became eternal, passed down through the ages, inspiring countless others to be brave enough to knock when they need help, generous enough to open the door when someone needs shelter, and wise enough to recognize love when it appears, even in the most unexpected circumstances. Rose had knocked on Lucas's door shivering, seeking only temporary shelter from a storm. Lucas had wrapped her in warmth, giving her not just physical comfort but emotional refuge. What neither of them knew in that moment was that the warmth they created together would last not just their lifetime, but for all the lifetimes that followed. Their love story became immortal, a beacon of hope and possibility, proving that sometimes the coldest, darkest nights lead us exactly where we are meant to be, into the arms of the person who will warm us for the rest of our days and beyond.